Republicans are using Israel as an excuse.
Right.
What they really want are tax cuts for the wealthy. So Israel, that can be one reason they
That's
put
why some
forth.
of the Republican Jewish supporters are really active.
Well, that's how they're being exploited.
Right.
And they're smart people. They follow these issues.
Right.
Them Jews sure are smart, Nancy, huh? Welcome to the Savage Nation. I wouldn't say that's the biggest story because Nancy Pelosi is known for being a dummy and an insulting dummy at that. But I got to ask Jewish listeners, how do you feel about Nancy Pelosi saying, you Jews sure are smart, but you're being misled by Republicans? Now, let's turn this around. What if a Republican said, oh, those blacks, they sure are smart, but they're being exploited by those Democrats. They're smart people, you know? How does anyone feel about that? No answer. New York City mayor wants hospitals to lock up baby formula to encourage breastfeeding. Now, I wrote a book called The Art of Feeding Children Well or Healing Children Naturally 30 years ago, and it's a great book in which I certainly encourage breastfeeding because I know that breast milk contains colostrum, which is an immune factor, and formula doesn't have colostrum. But I don't think it's the mayor's role to lock up baby formula to encourage breastfeeding because the next thing you know, this little mini Caesar in New York City, Mayor Bloomberg, may ban childbirth in New York City and say that viviparous reproduction is, while not illegal, viviparous reproduction is kind of distasteful. And we can get all the babies we need by importing them. We can bring in illegal aliens and have anchor babies. We don't need you to have viviparous reproduction anymore in New York City. Don't have any babies. That's not mandatory that you don't have babies, but Mayor Bloomberg wants to make certain that we have no more live births in New York. That would be as intelligent as this decision. The man is making himself an international laughingstock. I don't expect you to call about this. I'm sure most of you are looking at half-naked girls running around in the Olympics in London. I understand that. Since I myself am not in my normal California here on the Savage Nation, I'm on the East Coast enjoying the sweltering humidity and heat. The ocean's gorgeous. I came here for the ocean to use my surfboard, which I did. The water's like bathtub, 86-degree ocean. It's like swimming in green jello. But one of the things I like doing when I'm on the East Coast is picking up actual newspapers. For some reason, I don't buy them on the West Coast. It's all digital, right? But I grew up reading newspapers. The folded paper on the subway was a staple of my youth. So the papers I bought today are the Daily News, the Wall Street Journal, the Palm Beach Post, the New York Post. The front page of the Daily News shows a pack of girls, if you want to call them girls, just wild animals. They were riding a train at 6 in the morning, drunk, drinking beer. A 63-year-old male, a Vietnam veteran. The poor guy is going to work at 6 in the morning to sell souvenirs down in Times Square, and they're making noise on the subway. He's going to work. He says, can you please quiet down? They beat him up and stab him and then laugh about it. Now, I wouldn't call them girls. I wouldn't call them women. I would call them animals. The Vietnam veteran is white. The girls are not white. It's not a hate crime in New York City, as you well know. It's only a hate crime if it's in the other direction. Again, that's not a story you can comment on. But we go to page 2, and there's a story you are going to comment on. Justice Scalia, the most conservative justice on the Supreme Court and a hero of mine, says the right to bear arms could be restricted legally, and I agree with him. And in fact, he must be listening to the Savage Nation because after the massacre in Colorado in the movie theater, I went on this radio program and I said unless we conservatives call for some restrictions such as barrel magazines, body armor, the left is going to seize the day and they're going to wind up doing much more than we would do. Scalia came out ahead of it. He says the right to bear arms could be restricted legally. And he says that the Second Amendment limited the type of weapons people could carry even in those colonial days. There are some limitations. He says because at the time the Constitution was drafted, he said there were restrictions. For example, there was a law that barred the people in those days from carrying a really horrible weapon like a battle axe just to scare people. And he's right. We have to limit certain weapons, which we do. You understand that? Scalia says the right to bear arms could be restricted legally. I agree with him. Now, some would say, oh, he's a liberal. You're wrong. Unless you understand that no freedom is absolute. No freedom is absolute. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater, for example. You can't carry a machine gun. It's illegal. You understand that? There are no absolute freedoms in this country. Justice Scalia wants some limitations on arms compatible with the Second Amendment. Mayor Bloomberg says we're locking up baby formula. Here's a man who says medical marijuana good, baby formula bad. Medical marijuana good, baby formula bad. Soda bad. Unlimited amounts, Jeroboams of wine are not banned, because apparently the mayor would serve Jeroboams of wine at his dinner parties. For those of you who don't know what a Jeroboam is, look it up. It's an extremely large bottle of wine. It's not the fifth size that you're used to in a liquor store. A Jeroboam is much larger. People buy it for the sake of economy. Even if it's expensive Bordeaux wine, you want to buy it in the Jeroboam size because it's more economical than in the smaller bottle size, the way people buy big sodas at ball games to economize. You buy a 32-ounce soda, you split it with someone. It's cheaper than buying two 16s. Now the same mayor is saying, you know what? I want to limit the amount of baby formula that they get so they are encouraged to breastfeed. As I say, of course, breastfeeding is more desirable. Also in the newspaper today, 1-800-449-8255 is the phone number. Mitt Romney's in Israel saying no option should be excluded in defending the state of Israel. God bless him. Israel finally sees a friend again. You can't say that Obama's Israel's enemy, but he has abandoned Israel. There is no question that Obama has abandoned Israel and Romney has embraced Israel in plain English. Here's another story from, the Daily News and all the newspapers. Cheney is saying that it was a huge mistake for Palin to be chosen as a VP for old Tom McCain, who should have stayed in the shoe business. I'm joking, of course. I would argue that Dick Cheney was a bigger mistake than Sarah Palin. I would say that Dick Cheney was the biggest mistake in the history of the vice presidency. I would say that next to Joe Biden, Dick Cheney is the biggest laughingstock in the history of the vice presidency. Now, why would Dick Cheney suddenly decide that he should take a swing at Sarah Palin before taking an even bigger swing at President Obama on Monday? Why? Why would Cheney say that? He said, I met her, I know her, but based on her background, she'd only been governor for, 2 years. I don't think she passed that test of being ready to take over the presidency, and I think that was a mistake. Well, some would argue that he was the biggest mistake of all. He got us into Iraq based upon a false premise that the only person who believed he was telling the truth was Wallbanger on Fox News, the man who never went past, let us say, contracting school, yet he poses as a great intellect. That's right. Wallbanger on Fox News loved Dick Cheney. Wallbanger still thinks we liberated Iraqis. Wallbanger and the whole Fox gang thinks that the Iraq war was fun and wonderful. But every time you think about Cheney's war, the Iraq war, you should recognize that the only people who benefited from the Iraq war was the Halliburton subsidiary, Kellogg Brown & Root, which made about $10 billion for its superb work in Iraq. So all those soldiers who lost their arms, legs, and eyes got killed in the war that Bush and Cheney started. Well, some people think that Kellogg Brown & Root made a killing. That's good, isn't it? Cheney ought to be quiet and disappear. Cheney has no right to say Palin was a big mistake because Cheney, by the way, was the biggest mistake in history. I've given you 5 to 6 stories. The phone number now is 1-800-449-8255. It's the Savage Nation. Second Amendment's up there. Cheney's up there. Pelosi's up there. Let's start again and refresh the show on the Savage Nation. Let's start with the genius, Nancy Pelosi, telling Bloomberg News that Republican Jews, they're smart people, but they're being exploited. Any Jews out there feel insulted by that statement? Them Jews, they're smart, but they're being exploited. Listen to clip 5.
Many of the Republicans are using Israel as an excuse.
Right.
What they really want are tax cuts for the wealthy. So Israel, that can be one reason they
That's
put
why some
forth.
of the Republican Jewish supporters are really active.
Well, that's how they're being exploited.
Right.
And they're smart people. They follow these issues.
Right.
Oh, yeah, them Jews, they're smart. I know that. As an Italian, I know how smart them Jews are. Does any Jew out there listening do I have any Jewish listeners? Number one, I don't know if I do. Number two, if I have a Jewish listener out of my 8 or 10 million, are any of you offended by Nancy Pelosi's pandering to you? Can you imagine a politician saying, those black voters, they're smart, but they're being exploited? What do you think you might hear from Hy Jackson and the other race baiters? What do you think? But the Jews don't say a word. Anyway, look, that's a minor story. She's well known for not knowing what's going on. We know that. 1-800-449-825. There are so many other stories. Scalia opens door for gun control legislation. This is a big story. Obama takes a risk on bringing out Bill Clinton to bail him out with blue-collar voters. Is there a blue-collar voter who still thinks Bill Clinton is anything but what, well, he's always been? I mean, there's amazing stories this week. Doesn't matter where I am, east, west, north, south. North, east, west, and south. It's all the news to me. This is the Savage Nation. I'll be right back. Savage.